Not the best job, but not the worst. We sometimes worked in pairs or by ourselves, and I have a ton of similar stories. One day I had to go to a job by myself to install a dish system. When I got there, it was a woman in her late 40s. She seemed nice enough, even offered me water while I was outside. When I had to go and install the dish box inside both her living room and bedroom is when things got weird. I decided to hook up the living room first. I got in there, and while I was hooking it up, I noticed lots of unlabeled VHS movies laying around, and some that had written on titles like Hot Summer, Naked Beach, and Plumber's Choice. I thought they seemed odd, but didn't think too much about it while working. The entire time I was doing that, she would talk to me, asking me what I thought about the job, asked me my name, my age, and told me how she was a widow for a few years. After I got the first box done, I told her that I would get the next box. She said she was going to go outside the back and have a cigarette, and showed me the room before I went back to the van to get the box. I got to the van, called my boss to check in and let him know my progress, got the box, and went into the bedroom. Once I got in there, I noticed the TV on the other side of the bed, next to a window. As I got to the TV and started to make room for the box and make sure the cable I jacked into was near enough, I heard the bedroom door close. When I turned around, she was standing there in nothing but a see-through gown. She told me to be her bad service boy or something, and that she wanted to film me with her. I explained it's against policy and that I was married. She said she didn't care and wasn't going to tell anyone unless I didn't do it. I told her to please step outside the room and let me leave. She kept refusing and tried to walk closer. At this point, I remembered the window, and I noticed it was open, so I dove through. Sadly, the screen was there, but hey, it came out with me. I ran to my van and immediately called my boss. He told me to stay there and he was coming himself. When he got there, he asked what was left inside, and I told him. He said he would be right back and went to the door. He knocked, and she came to the door, still in the same gown. He asked if she would kindly change clothes and come back and get him, so that he could get my stuff out of there. At this point, she asked him if we could have a three-way. His face turned so red, I almost immediately laughed. He then turned around, walked back to me, and said that he would reissue me for anything left, and that he was calling the office to let them know not to activate her dish, and to send a team of people to get the boxes and tools. From what I heard from the other techs that I worked with, they ended up having to call the police because she wouldn't let them in and kept trying to tell them that we raped her. Thankfully, I never had to deal with her again, and I found that even the phone company had the same problem with her. Sadly, my boss quit 2 days later because he was tired of dealing with messed up customers all the time.
Here's a little background. I'm a 22-year-old female and I just moved to a small town from the big city with my dad. We moved in our house in early October and we've been having some problems with a leaky shower in the bathroom adjacent to mine. So my dad calls the plumber to come and take a look. The plumber arrives at around 8 AM the following day while I'm getting ready to go for work in my bathroom. My dad lets him in, so I hadn't gotten a good chance to look at him yet. My dad then apparently goes down the street to gas up in his car, then go to work, leaving the plumber to do his damn job in the bathroom. Now, my bathroom is just a toilet and vanity, with a door leading into a shared shower room that has another door leading to my dad's bathroom. So, while I was getting ready, there was only one door between the plumber and I guess that he figured out there was a lady in the house due to my hairdryer. The next thing I know, my bedroom door is opening and closing, and there's a very tall, very wide and terrifying man with more legs than teeth locking my door from the inside behind him. He then walks 5 feet towards me and stops in front of my bathroom door. I freeze. He stands there, staring at me for the longest 30 seconds of my life. He hits me with the wildest, untoothiest, scariest grin that I've literally ever seen, and he looks me up and down multiple times. I hear the door open and close, not knowing then that my dad had gotten back because he had forgotten his wallet, and the plumber pivots on one foot to do a twirly motion and unlocks my door and just walks out. My dad then walks in the room asking if the guy had really just been in there and goes to run after him, but the guy walked right to his truck and left without even fixing our shower. So my dad immediately called the company we hired the plumber from. He asked them to send someone else, but not that guy, and he tries to explain what happened to the manager. The manager then proceeds to tell my dad that it was our fault the man locked himself in my room with me because I didn't lock him out of my room in the first place. Sorry. Didn't know I needed to lock myself away in order to not be creeped on by a supposed professional. Just terrifying to think what might have happened if my dad hadn't have forgotten his wallet.
When I was a kid, my parents were impossibly strict. I was never given much opportunity to do things with friends, because my mother was confident that I'd end up doing drugs or having sex, and whatever else her imagination could conjure up. The exception were a few Asian friends. My mother, a Thai woman, was inherently trusting of girls who were fully Asian, not mixed like me, and was less strict about my spending time with them. And so it happened that one day, Lynn, a Chinese girl with 2 Chinese parents, invited me to the mall, and my mother actually said yes, and even gave me $20 for the bus, lunch, and maybe even a little something nice. Unfortunately, when I got to Lynn's house, only a few streets away, she sadly announced that some family had shown up unexpectedly, and she wouldn't be able to go. To describe my disappointment would be impossible. I was 14, and this was supposed to be the first real without my parents outing that I had ever embarked on. And here was Lynn telling me it wasn't going to happen. As she went back inside, I walked away, trudging back towards my house. But as I walked, the idea hit me. Why not just go myself? I had the money. I could just get on the bus myself and go to the mall. It started off staggeringly successful. I managed to catch the right bus, got to the mall, and wandered around. I had my first real burrito experience, played games in the arcade, and bought leather goddesses of Phobos. I was having the time of my life. It was getting dark. It was February, so dark came around 6 p.m., and I decided it was time to head back home. I got on the bus, paid my fare, and told the driver where I was headed. The driver shook his head and informed me that he didn't go that far. What's more, I had caught the last bus leaving the mall for the day, and that by the time he got me to the transfer station to catch the right bus, the buses would be done running. I put on a brave face and asked him how close he could get me. He described a spot about 2 miles from my house, so I agreed that was fine. He dropped me off where we had discussed, which happened to be outside of Dunkin' Donuts. Being that it was February, and that I was woefully underdressed for any significant amount of time outside, I went inside and bought myself a hot cocoa. Armed with my cocoa, I started the trek home. About a quarter mile into the walk, I approached an area that had always given me a little pause. It was just beyond the railroad tracks. In fact, it was the area my mind always conjured up when someone used the phrase, the wrong side of the tracks. There was even a strip club on the corner and a few rundown houses. I was determined to be brave though, and continued on resolutely. Just as I crossed the tracks, an oncoming red Econoline van, which I will never forget, slowed to a stop, and the driver rolled down his window. He gave me a friendly smile and said, "Hey, sweetheart, need a ride?" Now, I may have been a dumb 14-year-old who hadn't had enough sense to realize that going to the mall alone in the first place was a bad idea. Dressed in a short skirt and tight turtleneck, no less. But I knew with every fiber of my being that taking a ride from strangers, and this particular stranger especially, was a very bad idea. I tried to smile casually and waved vaguely ahead at a house nearby. "Nah," I said. "I just live over there." He looked back at the direction I was indicating, looked at me, and shrugged. "All right," he said, "but it's awfully cold out here." I just laughed and waved goodbye. He pulled away and drove off. Moments later, though, he drove by again, having apparently pulled a U-turn somewhere behind me. Just seeing this van again made my heart skip a beat, but he drove past me without slowing or even looking at me. He turned the corner ahead, and I breathed a sigh of relief. As I rounded the corner, though, my heart dropped. He was parked in the strip club's parking lot, with his van pulled in backwards so that it faced the street, his parking lights on. I couldn't see in through the windshield, but I tried to act like I hadn't even noticed him, and tried to act casual. I was already rounding the corner, but once I saw him, I tried to inconspicuously change routes and tried to act like I was headed for the house across the street. I calmly walked around the back of the house, as if maybe I lived in the back, and just stood there, trying to listen for signs of him driving away. I was terrified, however, when I saw headlights lighting up the driveway that ran alongside the house. And sure enough, his van drove slowly into view. I was frozen in fear. He reached the end of the driveway and turned around, slowly heading up. I could see him looking in my direction, but I couldn't tell if he had actually seen me. As soon as he started up the driveway again, I forced my legs into motion, ran around the other side of the house, and fled into the front porch and hid. I hid for what seemed like hours, and I prayed someone would open the door and find me, but I was too afraid to actually knock on the door and ask for help. Eventually, half frozen and scared, knowing that it was starting to get late and my mother was going to start wondering where I was, I peeked over the railing and scanned for any sign of him. I didn't see any, so I started running home. I still had over 1.5 miles to go before I got home, and even at 14, I couldn't sustain a run very long, especially in my half-frozen condition. The walk seemed to take forever, and at every sign of a vehicle larger than a car, I would duck behind a tree or hide behind a bush. The entire time, I was mapping getaway routes. I can honestly say I have never been so terrified in my life. Less than 1 mile from home, I saw a large vehicle headed towards me that seemed to have the same round headlights as an Econoline van. My heart just plummeted and I dove behind a bush. That I didn't pee myself when the driver slowed down is a wonder. I heard the window go down, and amazingly, blissfully, I heard my mother's voice say, "Julie?" I stood up, and there she was, in our Ford Bronco, peering at me in confusion. I think I went from behind the bush to inside the car in a single bound. I can say that I caught some serious hell that night for lying, being stupid, etc. But hell never felt so good, because the entire time, I could only think about what might have happened.
This happened in February 2013. The night after my cousin's birthday. We all drank heavily and I drove myself there, so naturally I spent the night. I ended up staying around the entire day, spending time with the extended family because I didn't really see them that often. I finally ended up leaving that night around 11 or so. Now, my house is about 20 minutes away on a good day, so on a late Sunday night, I'd be able to get home in half that time. Being about halfway home at this point, the road I'm on rides parallel to the airport that's right ahead of me. To the left are big industrial buildings and a few cheap motels scattered in between. I see behind me headlights in my rearview mirror. They're a fair distance away and I hardly notice them as I'm driving on at about 45 miles per hour or so. The headlights then start to get alarmingly close. After about a minute or so, as the headlights get progressively brighter, they reveal themselves to be belonging to an ugly old Jeep Cherokee that is full of bumps and practically riding on a bumper. I cut to the left lane, expecting this guy to keep riding when he suddenly switches over to the lane right behind me. High beams on full blast. This is when the panic mode sets in. I switch back over to the right lane. As I do, the Jeep does too and proceeds to speed up. Before I can get a good look into the cabin, he's speeding at about 50 feet or so in front of me, cuts into my lane and slams on the brakes. This guy wasn't playing. He tried to seriously brake check me, and I was prepared actually to slam into him. At this point, I'm thinking, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, as I'm completely in my defensive mode. He keeps accelerating back up at me, tailgating, swerving from lane to lane behind me, flashing his hazards. This is insane. I really don't know how long this went on for, but at the end of this road is a fork that I take left to get home. Right before the fork though, the Jeep speeds up to my left and finally I peer into the cabin. As he passes by, he's not even paying attention to what's in front of him. He's just yelling at me through the closed window. I have no idea what he's saying, but he was just saying something, alright. He was a tan guy in his 30s wearing a black ski cap, but it was dark. The most of him I could see was just his face, where his white teeth were, and crazy look in his eye. This guy seriously wanted to kill me. As he sped up, he went for one last chance to get to hit me. He completely cut to the right in front of me and came to a screeching, swerving halt so I could T-bone him in the passenger side. I cut left and swerved around him, ran the red light at the fork in the road and cut right, down the road and over the tracks that led into a neighbourhood. I don't even know how fast I was going, but apparently I was going fast enough that I practically went airborne when I crossed over the hump of the tracks. This was the last I ever saw of him. Now, I'm not a tiny guy of any sort. I'm 6'7", 300 pounds. If worse came to worse, I have this little pocket knife I keep in my car at all times, so if it really happens, I can go at this guy, but this guy looked like he took 1,000 amphetamines and decided to take a drive and happened to run into his mortal enemy. I went home and stared up at my ceiling the entire night.